crowd. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali.
Sorry.
Go ahead. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books on Magic. So we are so excited to have Jenny Jackson and J. Courtney Sullivan with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Jenny's much anticipated debut novel, Pineapple Street. But before we get into all of that, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First off, for all of you and the audience, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while indoors. We have some extras up at the front if you need one. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of tonight's discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Jenny will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Pineapple Street online using the link in the live stream description. So this launch was one of the first events I booked right after we opened this location here in Brooklyn Heights, and it feels so perfect to celebrate this launch in the neighborhood that comes to life in the book's pages. Following the endeavors of three women in a wealthy Brooklyn clan, this book is full of witty observations, sharp satire, and truly unforgettable characters. Jenny Jackson is a vice president and executive editor at Alfred A. Knopf, a graduate of Williams College and the Columbia Publishing course. She lives here in Brooklyn Heights with her family. Pineapple Street is, of course, her first novel. And as I mentioned earlier, J. Courtney Sullivan joins Jenny in conversation tonight. Courtney is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels Commencement Maine, The Engagement, Saints for All Occasions, and Friends and Strangers, all of which were edited by Jenny. She lives outside of Boston with her husband and two children. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Jenny and Courtney.
All right, well, I thought I would just start off by reading just a few minutes from Pineapple Street, and then we're going to have a conversation. So instead of beginning with the beginning, I'm going to begin in the middle. Sasha. When Sasha was 10, she had such an intense crush on Harrison Ford that sometimes she would lie in bed and cry with deep sorrow that they would never be together. She knew it was weird. He was a grown man and a famous actor, and she was a child with a dawning awareness that little hairs were growing up and down her legs, and it all compounded into a tragedy so devastating that she could barely stand to watch him in movies when anyone else was in the room. Her brothers obviously noticed her mooning after him and taunted her mercilessly. Later in life, when she saw in some celebrity magazine at the nail salon that Harrison got an earring, she felt embarrassed all over again that she'd been obsessed with someone so old. Sasha had been falling in love with Cord before he told her about his childhood crush, but the revelation was probably what sealed the deal. They were lying in bed one night, slightly drunk, and she told him about Harrison. "Did you ever feel that way as a kid?" she asked. "So intense and confused?" "Yeah, totally. I was in love with little Debbie," he confessed. "Who's that?" Sasha asked, running a finger along his bare chest. "A neighbor?" "No, the little girl with a hat on the box of snack cakes." Sasha sat up. "You were in love with the girl on the box of Swiss rolls? Those little chocolate things that taste like wax? I just thought she looked so nice. She had this wavy brown hair and a friendly smile. Do you think maybe you were just really hungry?" "Maybe," Cord considered. "I really love those oatmeal cookies with the cream in the middle." Sasha laughed and laughed. Together, they made a list of cartoon mascots by fuckability. Sasha felt Tony the Tiger was the clear winner. He just exuded cis male hotness with his big puffy chest and boundless enthusiasm. The sun-made raisin lady was obviously also a babe, rosy-cheeked, wearing a peasant blouse and a bonnet. The Cheetos Cheeto would be a fun date, but they agreed he'd try to leave his sunglasses on during sex. The Jolly Green Giant was maybe even hotter than Tony the Tiger, but Sasha worried he would be a terrible boyfriend, spending all his time in the gym. He was ripped. So you're more into the Pillsbury Doughboy? Cord asked. More to love? No, the Pillsbury Doughboy is too white, not sexy. Colonel Sanders? Oh, no, also too white. Plus the goatee. The Quaker Oats guy? Stop! All the human mascots are old men. Why do guys get the hot ones? Like who? Miss Chiquita? Sasha countered. Smoke Show? Cord agreed. Wendy? No way, Cord wrinkled his nose. Wait, so you loved Little Debbie but not Wendy? They're the same thing. Shut your lying mouth. Cord shook her shoulder playfully. Little Debbie is all kindness and cream-filled cakes. Wendy looks like Conan O'Brien with braids and smells like hamburger grease. That settled, they turned off the lights and cuddled up, and as they fell asleep, Cord whispered in her ear, "You're great." And Sasha knew he was the one.
That was amazing.
You know I just wanted to say the F word.
I think it's the Brawny Man for me, but
Oh, good choice.
maybe Mr. Clean. I don't know. Anyway, congratulations, Jenny Jackson, on this incredible novel, this incredible accomplishment. There are so many people in this room who love and adore you, who I recognize from so many different parts of your life, and including many of the authors who owe their careers to you, including me. So, thank you. We all love you very much. And let's just start at the beginning. I've got a bunch of different kinds of questions, but to start with, what is Pineapple Street about, and what was your inspiration for this particular book?
Sure. So I wrote this book sort of in Q3 of the first year of the pandemic. It was like that weird part where we were like not freaking out all the time, but we were working from home and we were lonely and we weren't seeing anyone, and I was just in Brooklyn Heights all the time, and I was walking through the neighborhood and I became sort of obsessed with this really fancy house on the block with these huge windows and a grand piano and a chandelier, and I just thought, that would be an interesting place to live. I would like to live there. And then one of my best friends, who's in the room tonight, had this crazy thing happen where her in-laws absconded to Connecticut and said, "You guys can move into our brownstone, but don't touch anything." And then the third thing is I read this article in the New York Times called "The Rich Kids Who Want to Tear Down Capitalism," about these socially minded millennial heirs who want to give away their fortunes. And all of a sudden these three ideas clicked together. It was like, oh, what if that big apartment on Pineapple Street has a rich family who lives there, and an in-law moves in and she can't change anything, and the youngest daughter wants to give away all their money. And that was just it. It was like tick, tick, tick. And I knew what the book was.
I love that. I feel like that's often the case, that there's a few different things that kind of all coalesce, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this is a story.
Yes.
Although I will say that I feel like a lot of people had like a surprising COVID-related life event that happened to them. Like you got divorced, or you got married, or maybe you moved to your hometown like I did, and you don't understand how it happened. I remember early days of COVID, like talking to a lot of friends who are novelists, especially those who have young children, about like, well, obviously none of us are handing in our books anywhere close to on time, and our editors couldn't possibly expect us to write a novel under these conditions. And the next thing I hear is, your editor has written an amazing novel. Damn it, now what excuse am I gonna use? But I think it's interesting. So the recent fabulous New York Times profile of you, the headline was, "A successful editor turns debut author, surprising nearly everyone." And that made me wonder, did this surprise you that you wanted to write a novel?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think No, in terms of wanting to write a novel, I think that that was something, that my parents and my brother knew that I wanted to do. But then, I moved to New York and I got into publishing, and I truly found the best job in the world. And I mean, you guys all think I'm crazy, right? Because I've had the same job for 20 years and I'm always like, I love my job. And everyone else is like, that's demented. But I just really have felt like so happy that I found something that I love to do. And I, because of the rhythms of our work and because you fall asleep reading manuscripts and you wake up thinking about writing copy, there isn't really a lot of space to do something like this. And so it wasn't so much that it was a dream deferred. It was like I was so in love with what I was doing. But then, when we weren't going into the office and when I was so lonely for social connection and when I was waking up so early and I didn't have to be anywhere and I didn't have to get dressed and nobody wanted to have lunch and there was nothing, I was like, there were these big gaps in the day, and weirdly those turned into creative gaps. So it was like, it wasn't, I guess, yes, I always wanted to write a novel, but for 20 years I wasn't sad that I wasn't writing a novel,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in your book, one of the things I love about your book is it is so funny. And it's like, and I read that you were saying you weren't meeting people for lunch, you weren't socializing, and so partly this was like a way of, I feel like all the funny lines you would have delivered at lunch, you put into this amazing novel.
Yes.
So everyone in the country gets to now have lunch with you. They're so lucky.
Yes, I mean, I think that we all walk through the world like with sort of a little like handbag full of charm, and we like dole it out as needed. And I felt like I had my handbag of charm, and I was like, oh man, like it's just like getting heavy. Like I don't have anything to do with this. And so I just sat down and I was like, yes, put it in the book, put it in the book. So I really felt that way.
I love that. I love how you rotate between the perspectives of three women in the Stockton family in this book. And I always wonder when people write from multiple points of view, was there ever like another family member you thought of including, or was there another point of view you tried? Like, how did you decide it would be these three women? And maybe tell us a little bit about them. What does each of them sort of represent in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I tell anybody who asks, like, why did you decide to do it from three different perspectives? I think so much of that was working with you for so long, because you've done what I now call the lazy Susan approach of, narration. And one of the things that you've said before is that it's really fun to write that way, because if you get stuck on a character, you're like, see you later, and you just pick up the next character and move on. Yep. The thing you did not tell me is that when it comes time to revise and you have to move a plot point around, it's like it messes up every single thing that comes after that. And so I feel like it is a great way to write and a terrible way to revise. But I knew that I wanted to write about three women. I think that we've read about wealth from a male perspective, I mean, I think even though Succession has female characters, it's pretty male. I think I wanted to kind of see how it would play out between mothers and daughters and sisters and in-laws. So the oldest daughter, Darlie, is the one I had the hardest time finding. And I think that, Darlie she's the most sort of conservative of the family. She worked as an investment banker. She married another successful investment banker. She had a huge trust fund. It just didn't seem that money was ever going to be a concern. And so when it was time to ask Malcolm to sign a prenup, she thought, oh, I can't ask him that. Like, we're going to be together forever and we're doing so well, we don't need it. And so she just passed on it, which means it would go down to her children, but so she wouldn't have access to her money. And that turns out to have been not the wisest decision for her. And I felt like I knew all that about Darlie, but I didn't really get Darlie until I sort of happened upon Darlie's obsession with aviation investment banking, obviously. And
as you do.
As you do. So this sort of came from Tori, from my husband, because Tori lived with these great guys when we were first dating. We were in our early 20s. And these guys were major av geeks. They both worked in finance. And his one roommate, Doug, on like Sunday mornings, Tori and I would be like lying on the couch watching like I don't know, like Die Hard for the 95th time, like eating bagels. And Doug would be sitting there in his sweatpants, like day trading JetBlue stocks based on the algorithm of their seating that he had figured out. And I was like, oh, he's doing something more productive than I am. So I thought that was so interesting. And then, you know, his other roommate, Nat, was like, learned to fly his own planes and was also just hugely into aviation. And I was so inspired by them and also just thought what they did was so cool. And then once I gave Darlie a passion, once I got her to like go deep nerd into something, all of a sudden the character became so much more interesting because this is a woman who gives up her career for work, but it was a career that she was passionate about, and it was a specific career, and it was something she was good at and excited about that not a lot of other women are driven towards. And so that made that character, once I figured out the aviation investment banking line on it, that's what made her real to me. Georgiana, the youngest, is like this delightful brat. She's spoiled. She doesn't really know that she's spoiled, which makes her even more fun to write. Because when you're writing in close third person, there's like this little magical zone between what the character knows about themselves and what you as a narrator can let the reader know about them. And that's the little area where I was able to be like, look how bad she is. And so that was really fun for me to write somebody who was so self-centered and, you know, and then eventually grew up. And then the last character, Sasha, I think is a necessary character because Sasha is an outsider, and when you're writing about a world that makes sense to a, you know, fraction of 1% of the population, you really need a translator. You need, if you're going to walk into a strange land, you need someone to lead you in there and be like, oh my god, this is weird, guys. So that was Sasha's job in the book.
I love that. Okay, so this is a question that I thought of while you were talking, and now I think I forgot it, but I think I can get it back. So, was what you said about, like, you knew about the Lazy Susan thing going into writing multiple points of view, but not what it would be like to have to do the actual, like, editing of that. Yeah. And I'm curious because you know so much more than most debut authors going into the process of writing a novel because you're constantly working on novels all the time as an editor. So, like, what to you was like, oh, I already know this thing that most people wouldn't? And then what were the things where you were like, how did I not already know this?
I think that there's a really interesting area between what you know and what you're able to do. And so I knew, and I'm not going to do spoilers because it's day one, so I think a lot of people haven't read it yet, but there is a very big event that happens to Georgiana that is the catalyst for her to reevaluate her whole life and who she wants to be. And I knew really early on that that was going to happen and that that was going to be sort of the root of the girl who wants to give away her great fortune. But in my infinite wisdom, I put that event really late in the book, which makes it really hard to pitch. And so it's a bizarre thing to know as an editor. You have to put the juicy stuff up front because you want to be able to write about it in your copy. You want to make it your hook. You want to pitch it. And just because that isn't how my writing path took me there. All those things were too late in the book. And I knew they were too late in the book, but by the time I'd written them there, I kind of didn't see how they could be otherwise. But then my brilliant editor, you know, said, got to move these things up and help me figure out how to do that. And so I think it sometimes it's like sometimes you know things and you just need somebody else to make you do it. Mm-hmm. And then you need a little help figuring out how to get there.
Yep, that makes sense. Well, you just kind of answered my next question, which was about the fact that I'm not going to give anything away about the book, but there is a really incredible plot twist in this novel. And I love a really incredible plot twist that I did not see coming as a reader, and I really admire it as a writer. There have been 3 books with plot twists that have blown my mind in the last couple of years.
Tomorrow.
Yes, of course. Tomorrow, edited by Jenny Jackson. Pineapple Street, written by Jenny Jackson. And then Christina Baker Klein's most recent book, which I believe had nothing to do with Jenny Jackson.
No, but we're friends.
Unfortunately, you're friend of Jenny Jackson. But anyway, it's really dazzling how you do it in this book, and I was really curious. But you kind of just answered, like, you knew going in that there was going to be a twist.
I knew that the tragic event was going to happen
Okay.
in the book. But it's funny. So one of my writers, Chris Bajalian, often says that he doesn't know exactly, the shape the book is going to take as he's writing. And I found that I always believed that Chris felt that way, but I did not think I was going to be that kind of writer. I knew that plot twist, but there were so many moments where I'd be sitting there, I would be about to end the chapter, and then I'd be like, and then everything went up in flames. And I'd stand up and I'd be like, whoo, when I get up tomorrow and I have to figure out what to do next, I'm going to be mad I wrote that, but I kind of like it, So sometimes something would just it would just feel like the thing to do, and you kind of have to follow it.
Yeah. It is amazing how your characters just lead you down paths.
Yeah.
It's very hard to explain to people who don't do it. It sounds very woo-woo,
Oh,
but
it
it's
sounds
just what it is.
yeah, it
It's
sounds
kind of what it
fake.
is.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Brooklyn Heights, because we are in Brooklyn Heights, and this novel is so steeped in the wonderful world of Brooklyn Heights. And I was walking around today, and I remembered, so when I first met you, which is 2007, 2008.
You lived on Cranberry Street.
I lived on Cranberry Street, and my friend Amanda Milner Fairbanks and I, she lived on Pineapple Street, and we both worked at the New York Times, and our beat was Brooklyn Heights, because we were ambitious, but we were very lazy. And so we would just be like, ooh, any interesting stories in this bar tonight that we happen to want to drink in for several hours? Okay, we're going to write about that. And so one of the stories I wrote was my favorite thing that I wrote about on my Brooklyn Heights beat was when the Moonstruck house sold. And it sold, you all know the Moonstruck house, right? Okay. So the house from Moonstruck, obviously. That would have been 2008, and I think it sold for $4 million, and at the time, that was the most expensive house that had ever sold in Brooklyn Heights. And I wrote a whole newspaper story about it, and I remember interviewing the guy who had the house, and he said, we just sold our house for 100 times what we paid for it. So now Amy Schumer just bought that house for $12.5 million, and it just made me think, so what's up with Brooklyn Heights now? Because it's no longer my beat. I don't really know it as well as I once did. What is it? I feel like there's some wonderful kind of old-fashioned, old-timey stuff happening in Brooklyn Heights, and also a whole new modern, world of wealth that I don't know about. And I'm curious sort of how it inspired you both as a location and also when you're writing about class and wealth and privilege, it seems this would be a good place to set that story. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I think Brooklyn Heights is fascinating for a couple reasons. So one of the reasons that I find it so interesting is it's been very, very attractive to moneyed Brooklyn for a long time. Some of that is just because it's a super short subway ride into Manhattan. Some of it is because the building codes mean that there's just absolutely beautiful apartments to live in. I think some of it is people are really attracted to how sleepy it is. There aren't a ton of loud restaurants. There aren't, clubs. There's also not a lot of throughways, so it's very quiet. One of the things that I learned more about while researching the book was the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Brooklyn Heights. And I think in some ways the Jehovah's living in Brooklyn Heights had a huge impact on the way the neighborhood developed. If you look at Brooklyn Heights compared to Cobble Hill or Carroll Gardens or our neighboring areas, there are so many fewer restaurants or cool restaurants in the neighborhood. And a lot of that is because the Jehovah's had dining halls in their buildings. And so you had tons and tons of real estate taken up by people who weren't dining out. And that has a real cultural effect on a neighborhood. And it works well for families who are mostly going to be cooking at home and not going out. It means it's less enticing towards, people who are younger and want to be out all the time. So there's definitely some of that culture that's changed. I also think that we have it's a pretty old neighborhood. There are a lot of people who've lived here for generations, and also a lot of people who are just old who live in the neighborhood, which is different than Cobble Hill and, some of the other local neighborhoods. And then lastly, it's the celebrity thing is both new and not new. You know, there have been celebrities in Brooklyn Heights forever, all the way back to Truman Capote. But lately, it really does feel like there's kind of a splashy celebrity moment in Brooklyn Heights. And I think that simultaneously thrills and horrifies the people who live here.
That makes sense. That's really interesting about the Jehovah's. I didn't think about that they made the neighborhood sort of uncool in a desirable way.
Yes, and then they left recently. They absconded and moved their location up by Ossining, and so there was a giant real estate turnover, and a lot of these incredible buildings became available. Tons and tons of apartments that were, astronomical, the Bossert Hotel, the Watchtower building, all these, there was a big changeover. And so a lot more people and a lot more affluent people moved to Brooklyn Heights over the past couple years as there was this real estate turnover.
And guess what? When we were on the Brooklyn Heights beat, my friend Amanda came in one day. She's like, I got a tip. The Jehovah's are leaving Brooklyn Heights. And our editor was like, no, they're not. And that was the end of it. And now look.
She was right.
Should have all
She
bought
was
real
right.
estate then. Anyway, whatever. So, there's been a lot of attention paid to your day job in the conversation about this book, which makes a lot of sense. But I was thinking today, most debut authors have day jobs. And there's probably writers in this room or watching on YouTube who are curious, how did you do this? How, especially because you have little kids. How did you have a full-time job, raise children, live through a pandemic, and write a novel, and get your hair to look like that? I mean, you're superhuman.
Like giant amounts of credit go to my husband Tori, who keeps the wheels on. But also giant credit goes to insomnia because I just woke up at 4:30 or 5 every day, and I wrote until the kids came out and they were like, Mom, we're hungry. And I'm like, here's a granola bar, watch TV, leave mommy alone. And then the kids would go off to school and I would go for a run, and then I would come back and write a little more. Then I do my day job. And then at the end of the day, I developed this really productive routine where I would put the kids in the bath and I would pour just a giant glass of wine, and I would sit on the closed toilet lid and drink wine and write. And my kids would be like, Mommy, I'm really wrinkled. And I'd be like, that's good for you. It's working. Stay in there. Mommy, I'm cold. And I'd be like, you're not that cold. One more paragraph. So it's really like, I mean, I know people say nights and weekends. Weekends when you have kids, that's not a writing time. That's not a time for anything. That's just survival. But early mornings and late nights, that was it.
I feel like so many women with children had like a really intense sort of insomnia during COVID, like the early stages of COVID, and either you worked the like morning shift or the late night shift. So I was always writing from like 11 p.m. to like 4 in the morning. And then I have a friend who's a lawyer, and she got up at 4. So we used to like literally over text, we'd send the high five emoji at 4 in the morning. I'd be like, I'm going to bed. She's just waking up. We were like shift workers. But I mean, you're right. Like the weekends, no. When you have children, that's like TGIM. Thank God it's Monday.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see. What else do I want to ask you about? Let's talk about Curtis McCoy. Tell me about him.
Curtis is one of my favorite characters, and I think my love for Curtis harkens back to my original love of Bridget Jones's Diary, because I think Curtis is a little bit of a Mark Darcy. You know,
yeah.
He when he and Georgiana first crossed paths, I think she calls him an ass. It's just like exactly the kind of vibe that they had. So Curtis is a former classmate of Georgiana. He is the heir to a giant defense fortune, and he does not want to accept the family money. And so Curtis has written this, he's been the subject of this piece in the Sunday Styles about how nobody his age should be the recipient of hundreds of millions of dollars, and that he wants to give away all of his money. And Georgiana thinks that, I'm not sure, I think she at first thinks that it's smarmy, and then over time comes to kind of think it's cool. So Curtis, despite the fact that they don't get along right away, is very influential to Georgiana.
I was thinking also when you were talking earlier, a lot of times, like, I feel like when you read fiction, there's just like a vibe about certain things, and you're like, oh, I understand what's going on in that author's life, even though like I would deny that completely. And this is a further tribute to you, Tori, because I feel like the marriages in the book are so lovely, really. At the end of the day, like the couples actually really like each other and love each other. It's so nice, because that's not always the case in fiction or life. So it's lovely. But like, did you think about that, or is it just kind of like comes from you because that's, you know what I mean?
I think it's, I mean, you know this, that life has a weird way of working its way into your fiction, but often it's gestures and moments that are totally unrelated to like the kind of person who did it or the circumstances of what happened, you know. But I remember that Georgiana has this, can I spoil like a tiny thing or should I not? No spoilers. All right.
No.
Georgiana embarrasses herself. Georgiana embarrasses herself in front of Curtis and then runs into him the next day and just wants to die. And I very clearly had this moment of embarrassing myself in college in front of someone and then having to sit next to him in my Jane Austen senior seminar the next day and just wanting to like melt into a puddle. And I think that like it like obviously scarred me super deeply, so I had to write about it in a novel. I just think that's the way that things work themselves out in fiction. Like, you know, it transmogrifies into something different, but that same feeling of, oh my God, I want to have my character have that happen, where she embarrasses herself so much and then has to just like face the music the next day. Kind of mean, really.
I feel like there's something very sort of Victorian novel Jane Austen-esque about the role that like different parties play in the book, and of course the matriarch of the family plans parties, and I don't know, I wonder if you could talk about that and like sort of how the parties are these sort of little, they have a lot of meaning, I would say.
So I think there's two things at play here. Number one is like we were all home, you know, never going to parties, and I was just desperate to be at parties, and I was like, I am gonna write a party. Like if I can't get to one, I'm gonna make a party happen. So they do go to a lot of parties because I purely wanted to go to parties. But I also I enjoyed writing Tilda because Tilda is the matriarch of the family. She's pretty out of touch and she loves a theme party. And I know nobody here watches Bravo or Below Deck, but if you did, you would notice that they're always throwing these theme parties that are so culturally insensitive. You watch it and you're like, how are you doing this? Like, this is so inappropriate. And so I enjoyed having these characters walk the line and throw parties that are like slightly cringe, or then, you know, really cringe. You know, they do a gender reveal baby shower that is pretty cringe, or they go dancing at a Russian dance hall in Brighton Beach where these, you know, wealthy wasps from the Upper East Side decide to dress in oligarch chic costumes, not realizing that it's like wildly offensive. And so I just sort of wanted to push the envelope on theme parties because I think like 90% of theme parties are offensive, and it's kind of funny to poke at them.
Yeah, that makes sense. What else do I want to ask you, Jenny Jackson? I want to ask you so many things. I'm like, do I want to talk about Brooklyn, or do I want to talk about your characters? I want to talk about both. What has it been like, I guess, to be like published and go through the process of publishing, and like you're choosing an editor, like you know so much, like what is that all like?
I feel like, I mean, just no discounting how lucky I've been, because I know it's been a million times easier for me having worked in the industry. I also think that in some ways it's made me way, way more grateful, because every good thing that happens, I know that like 15 people have been just like sweating to make happen, you know. There's nothing good that happens that I'm like, oh, that probably happened because I wrote a great book. Every single one of those things that happens, I'm like, oh, the whole Viking department like sweated for days and sent persuasive emails and, you know, themed scarves and went above and beyond. So I feel like in some ways it's made me just a lot more appreciative of everything that goes into it. I laugh because I really had very high hopes for myself for being edited. I thought that I was going to be super thick-skinned and cool about everything. And I chose an editor who I knew I just respected so deeply, Pam Dorman. And Pam gave the best, smartest notes ever. And yet still anything that was like a hair critical, like, hey, maybe this scene could be zhuzhed up, I'd be like, if you didn't like it, why'd you buy it? Like, I really, it was really hard to not be really human about the whole thing. I thought I had it a little more under lock. Turns out, no.
Way to be honest, though. What a good answer. I love that. Okay, so we actually have to turn it over to the audience for their questions now. Who wants to start? Oh, good. I feel like the first one is always the hardest.
Well, this will be easy, Jenny. One of the many things I love about the book is it is about women and their relationship with money, because I don't think people talk about it enough. But I'm curious, when he is old enough to read it, Sawyer, what do you want him to get from this book?
Oh, I love that.
And do you want me to repeat the questions? So the question was that, you know, most novels, why am I, I'm like talking like I'm translating into foreign language. Oh, that's how you say it. So most, sorry, I don't get out much. So essentially talking about, like, it's excellent that this book handles the topic of women and money. And when Jenny's young son is old enough, what was the question? How will he feel about it, do you think? Or
What do you want Sawyer to learn from
what do you want him
What's
to
what I
learn
want
from
Sawyer
it?
to learn
what do you
from
want him
it?
to get from this?
You know, I think that we have culturally just been so trained not to talk about money. Money is awkward. I mean, even with some of my best friends, we don't talk about what we make. We don't talk about our rent. We don't. It just feels like taboo, and I'm not sure that that's a really productive taboo. I think that is sort of changing generationally, and I think that younger people talk increasingly about money and more honestly about money. And so, you know, I think Sawyer will probably be in a pretty different landscape when he understands how money works. I mean, right now he goes, Mom, I want some more Pokemon cards. Can you go to the office and get some more money? And I'm like, not how it works. But, I mean, kind of. There's some other steps in between. But I do hope that, like, I hope that he feels more free to talk about money when he's a grown up.
Are your kids impressed that you've written a novel, or are they like, whatever?
Oh, they're impressed. They're impressed. They will tell everyone. They'll tell everyone. It's great. I mean, I think it's led to some misunderstandings where Wavy, my second grader, has gone to school and been like, so my mom's famous. And they're like, who is she? Her name is Jenny Jackson, and she wrote a book that's not out yet. And they're like, great. So she's impressed. I don't think anybody else is.
A two-part question from Jennifer Close.
Edit any differently since you did edit it? And the second question is, I guess Courtney said some of your authors handed in manuscripts late, which is weird. If you were nice to them about it, did you make fun of them privately?
So, do you edit any differently now that you've been edited? And are you prepared to judge harshly any of your writers who have been delinquent? 1,000% I will edit differently. I think I've always tried to be gentle on the page and to say, you know, I wonder if there's a better way to phrase this. And I know it sounds like I'm like a third grade girl, but I do put hearts in the margins when I'm editing. And I've come to realize like how meaningful that is, because when Pam would write ha 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 in the margin, and when Pam would write I love this, like it meant so much to me. And then I also think the biggest revelation for me is that I just didn't understand what the cost of revision was for writers. Like I'd callously be like, you know what, let's just like try this scene from a different character's perspective. If it doesn't work, we'll just throw it away. And now I'm like, literally like you want me to go spend 2 weeks and pour my blood, sweat, and tears into a scene, and then like maybe we'll throw it away? Like, it's so mean. So if I do have to say that again, which might happen, I'm gonna be like really apologetic about it. So my empathy is way up. I also really misunderstood. I have authors who are reluctant revisers, and I have this one author who I love, and we enter every revision process like we're going into an auction, and I'm like, I'm gonna need another 30,000 words, and he's like, I'll give you 5, and I'm like 20, and he's like 15, and so anyway, we end up somewhere in the middle, and I used to think it was because he was just like, I'm done with that book, I want to do the next thing. I don't think that's what it is. I think that when he is writing, he's in a very specific frame of mind, and when he's not there anymore, it's really hard to access that voice again, that creative place again. And so I feel bad that I used to think he was, I don't know, I feel bad that I didn't get that, and I think I really get it a lot more now. So empathy meter way higher. As for authors missing deadlines, I still plan to be very strict about that.
So I bought a ticket to this event. The only thing I read about the book was that it was set in Brooklyn, and then I bought a ticket, and that was all that I knew. Because I like to read novels that are set in Brooklyn, just to fall in love with this borough in a new way. And I think it's Modern Lovers, Emma's book, that's set in. I think it's in Prospect Leopard's Garden. And I was like, oh, I've never been there, and now I want to live there and start a whole life there. What are you hoping people take away about Brooklyn from this book?
You know, it's funny. One of the things that has been interesting about the process of writing Brooklyn Heights is something that I learned from my friend Kevin Kwan, because Kevin has written about so many places and showed how glamorous and gorgeous and incredible they can be. And when Kevin was helping me plan a trip to Shanghai, which he gave me amazing pointers, he was like, but Jenny, it's not exactly like it is in the book. Like, you know that, right? And I was like, oh, really? Oh, okay. And it wasn't. And so I think I've learned from him permission to turn up the volume on a place. And so the Brooklyn Heights, that if somebody read this novel, they really might think that you just walk through Brooklyn Heights being like, hey, Adam Driver, what's up, Amy Schumer? And like, it's actually still part of Brooklyn. It just has some, you know, glitzy, lovely little edges to it. And so I think I've painted a pretty fun, aspirational view of Brooklyn Heights. I think it's every bit as beautiful as I make it out to be, but I also think that it's a lot more normal than maybe I made it seem on the page.
Did you know that they were talking about you in the Brooklyn Heights Moms group on Facebook and being nothing but kind?
What?
Yes.
Facebook group?
So positive. I didn't even know I was in that group, and then a thing popped up and it was like, did you read this profile of this author who lives in the neighborhood? I can't wait to read her book. I was like, what? You guys are being so nice. Really, you're really bitchy. So that's like a real tribute to you, Jenny Jackson. You had your hand up. Somebody right behind Jennifer.
Well, you know what? I think you kind of just answered it, because even though I love my neighborhood, you use the word sleepy, and I sometimes find it a little boring. So I was interested in how Brooklyn Heights was part of the story, but I think that you just kind of answered it a little way. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, so that is one of the cheats here. So she said, you know, I describe the neighborhood as sleepy, and sometimes it can be a little bit boring. And I think that when it came to setting all of the parties and social interactions, it's not like they were taking place at, you know, clubs and lavish restaurants in the neighborhood. There's lots of events taking place in private homes, or, you know, at the school auction or whatever, because I feel like when I was looking at the Monopoly board of places where I could set the action, I was sort of limited in terms of trying to, you know, be faithful to what's actually here and use real places.
I really loved what you read, too. I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, thank you.
So is this literally the first thing you've ever written?
Well, when I was 7, I wrote a novel called The Water Problem. It's about 2 friends fighting pollution. which I don't know, Pam, if you're interested, I could send the manuscript over. And then I do have another novel in a drawer that we'll see, maybe it'll come back out, and then I have some words on something new. So I kind of have the bug now. I think it's so much fun. It's so much fun. And I mean, all the writers here know this, right? You have a great day and you feel like you're on top of the world and that you're, like channeling some incredible thing. And then you have a day where everything you write is total garbage and you feel like pretty worthless. But the good days are really fun. So if you can cobble together enough of them, it's a really fun thing to do.
Oh, that's so nice. I remember we have the same agent, Brittany Bloom, who's incredible, who's here.
Yeah.
Who is a
Brittany.
she's such an elegant human being in addition to so many other things. And I remember I wrote a novel. She's like, I don't see this as your first novel. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll write a different one. And I wrote another one. I don't see this as your first novel. Okay, I'll write a different one. And then I wrote Commencement. And then I look back, I'm like, oh, she was saying those will never be published. I was like, this will be my third novel. No, this will just not be a novel. So sometimes you have to have a book in a drawer before you have a book on a shelf, right?
I think that's great. A starter novel. You
Starter
kind of
novel.
learn the mechanics. I'm into it.
Yes. Anybody else? Any more questions?
Do you write for yourself or an imagined audience?
Ooh, I
Ooh.
like that.
Do you write for yourself or an imagined audience? I think that it's somewhere in between. I have certain people that I am seeking to amuse when I write, and I think that at some point I will want those people to read it. And then when I write something that I think is like hilarious, I follow Tori around the apartment. I'm like, honey, just listen to this. Wait. Stop what you're doing. Just listen. Wait, no, hold on. I didn't say that right. I'm going to say it again. I'm a great roommate. So it's a little bit of both. I write for myself, but I do have certain people that I think about when I write. I write for my agent. I write sometimes for Alexa. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. So I write for Jennifer Close. So I have my people that I think if they like this and think it's funny, then I'm on the right track.
Jennifer Close. That's so nice. Why don't you write for me? Just kidding. Anybody else? I feel like there's like a couple more questions burning. I have a psychic question and answer thing, and I can just feel there's a couple more. Anybody? We have time for two more. So the two of you who want to, okay, it's you and it's you. It's Rachel Ferschleiser and Julie Bear. I memorized the names of everyone in this room before I came.
I never thought you were demented for loving your job. I did think you were demented when you told me that you really missed Midtown. And I am curious, we talk about Brooklyn a lot. What did you miss about Midtown, and how does it feel being back?
So Rachel really made fun of me a lot because during the pandemic, I would send her these texts being like, don't you miss getting a chopped salad across the street from the office? And she'd be like, that is literally the last thing a normal person would be missing right now. I was desperate to get back to Midtown. Really deeply uncool. I don't know. I do head back to Midtown. I'm not sure Midtown these days is giving me those sparkly vibes that mean I need to write a Midtown novel next. I am writing something new. And it's set in my hometown of Ipswich, Massachusetts, and I hope it comes together. I'm having fun. When I'm having fun. When I'm not having fun, it's terrible. So let's see.
That's so perfectly on track, Jenny. You're a novelist. Is that it? Okay.
We have.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Courtney, for moderating this fantastic discussion. And thank you, of course, Jenny, for celebrating this wonderful launch with us. As I said earlier, we do have some additional copies available for purchase. So if you haven't gotten it yet, now is your chance. Jenny will be signing and personalizing books at the little alcove. My coworker Christina is pointing to it now. It's a little bit hidden. So we're gonna have everyone line up down the center aisle and then kind of curve around. We ask that you please take all of your personal belongings with you. And if you could, save your hellos until the signing line, just so we can get Jenny over there. That's all. Let's give these two one last round of applause.